Okay, let's talk a little bit about hinge joints. We talked about distance joints last time. We're going to look at hinge joints this time. All right. Now, this isn't an exhaustive demonstration, but it's just to kind of get you going in the right direction. A lot of the success in using different joints is really just sort of experience and getting a feel to know exactly how they're going to interact and, just trying them out, trying different situations, seeing how they work. So, in this situation, I've got my little hero in my scene again, and I have a set of two boxes over here, two cubes, and then I have this one longer cube that I've called a bridge in the middle here, and it's just a, it's just a 3D cube, but that it has specifically a 2D collider on it here. And it also has a hinge joint 2D on it. Now, if I don't have the hinge joint on, I just have the rigid body on it. Of course, if I press play, that little platform is just going to drop down, especially because my character's on top of it, and nothing particularly exciting goes on. And let's see, if I move the hero across here, and let's see, let's set the hero there, you'll see that the box still just kind of drops down. It's just under its own control. Now, say I were to attach a hinge joint to this object. Now, I'll go ahead and I will remove the initial hinge joint. Well, here's like a quick example, So you'll see a hinge joint has some sort of pivot point that then the joint rotates around, or the connected object rotates around. So let's get rid of the one here, and I will just go ahead and add a hinge joint 2D. You'll notice it puts it right at the center, and now if I start it up, nothing seems to happen, okay, because it's perfectly balanced. Let's move our hero over here, and this is just the hero prefab. It's been repurposed from my other project. And if I hit go ahead play, you'll see he drops down and he hits the hinge joint, and the hinge joint then begins to rotate. Okay, it's rotating around its center there, and so let's see the bridge. And if you look, and I edit angular limits, it has no limits. It can spin all the way around, all 360 degrees, and it has a connected anchor in the world at 1.791 and 162, and the anchor on the body here is at 0, 0. I'll turn off auto configure just for the sake of argument now. And let's see, if I click this and I move it around, you'll see I'm moving the object, but what's happened is that the anchor hasn't moved here. So if I now press play, well, it didn't work out too well in that case, because let's see, it really still wants to be around that point. So let's see, let's change the connected anchor in this direction and put it here. You'll see it wants to rotate the center around that point, okay? Right? That is the connected anchor and the anchor. So normally what I want to be doing is I want to move the connected anchor and the anchor together here. So if I were to, for example, auto configure and then move one or the other, say over here, hopefully we'll see that now it's doing the right thing and pivoting around that point, okay? So the anchor is off of the object, and the connected anchor here is in the world, right? So we turn that off, and you'll see now I can move this anchor further over here. Watch what happens. Get snapped back again, okay? So we have to sort of be tricky about the relationship between these in the real world. The anchor point is trying to reconfigure, snap. Let's see, there's the anchor point, there's the rotation. So it can get a little bit weird if you're not careful. All right, but generally we're going to wind up without an offset between the two, right? We set the anchor point and the connected anchor And we'll sort of do the right thing here. 0, 0. And where do we go here? Auto connect them up again. And oops. Sometimes it's tricky to select one or the other without here. Sometimes it's easier to move it that way. Okay. Let's try that again. Okay, so now there's the anchor, and the connected anchor I can't change because it's auto. But now, okay, so the normal behavior is that it is the connected anchor is at that location, and the anchor on the object is at that location. And let's see. So it's obvious what happens when I move the anchor. It should be obvious here. The anchor in the world is moving around, so that's pivoting in the real world, right? That's gonna, oh no, you know what? It's using it as a relative. It is anchor, connected anchor. Okay. The connected anchor is this position in the real world. Alright. And if I set this to 0, 0, connected anchor is still there. And the anchor point of the object is there. Okay, so it's trying to rotate that point in the object around there. So the relationship is a little weird. Let's see here. Shift that around again. So now that anchor is with regards to the object, and the connected anchor is still in the real world, so it's going to try to take that object, that relationship, it's going to wind up moving this over to there and then rotating around there, if I'm correct here. Yep, moved it over there, and now it rotates it around there. Okay, so what it's trying to do is, it does try to say, okay, here's the point in the world, and then here's the offset inside the object, right? So it's a little bit odd. Do we kind of get that now? All right, so if I go ahead and I move this anchor point somewhere, you'll see it immediately is going to try to anchor it around that point and then maintain that offset that's determined by this anchor. It's a little bit odd. So for now, let's do this. Let's say that the anchor point is at 0, 0, and we'll go ahead and let it put the connected anchor at that position in the world, right? So now it's recentered everything here. So the player falls and it pivots. Now, what if I wanted to move that point and the pivot point over so that it's at the end here? So I'm going to want to move that, the connected anchor, and I want the anchor, because remember, right now it's going to try to snap this over here and pivot around that. So what I really want to have happen is I want this x to be at what? 3? No. At 1? No. 0.5. Something like that. So now that it's moved a little bit, I think I can move it the rest of the way. Okay. Like there. And you'll see it's sort of pivoting as I would want it to. Oh, and it's smacking into the poor player. Sorry about that, player. So let's move that over again. And tweak that over a little bit. You can always use auto configure to kind of line them up again. It's kind of fun. All right, so there it is. Now this is going to swing back, and boom. Okay. All right, so now I have this hinge that's located here, and it's an offset from the center of the object, and it is kind of acting like, kind of want it to do. So the question is, what are these other parameters? So you're going to want to go ahead and play around with those a little bit. And then the most interesting thing in here is this use of the motor. Okay, what a motor is going to want, it's basically a force that's intrinsic to the joint that's going to want to move the joint in a certain way. And it has a force and it has a speed. So first we're going to turn down this force a little bit. Let's set it at 10. And let's set the speed to 10. See what happens. Okay, so you'll notice it immediately tried to rotate there, and I'll move the player out of the way so that it isn't being influenced by the player unduly. Okay, so it falls down, hits the player. That's kind of what we were expecting it to do, so let's have it do something a little bit different. So we'll set the motor speed to be -100. Now, oh, well, the other important thing is to enable, say, use motor. Turn that on. That would help. So now you see, even when it comes to rest, it's trying to push it in a certain direction. So let's try to set this much higher, and maybe we need to increase the force as well. So let's create the maximum motor force, 1000. All right, so now the motor's pushing in that direction. It has more force. Now, this is a little wacky of one. Let's do it in this sense. Okay, we're going to go 10 in with a force of 100. So now it's going to resist the rotation, right? So instead of just rotating down, it winds up rotating up, which is kind of cool. Now what happens if I select the player and I put him on here? So the player goes on there, drops down, and now the weight of the player is resisting the force of the motor. See, as I move towards the center, eventually when I walk off, the motor is going to do what it wants to do. Okay, so that's kind of a fun one. You can have a motor that's kind of just pushing things constantly, and you can use it as, you know, if I wanted to walk up in this area, I have to be careful. Okay, I can run and eventually jump off the end, but if I don't time it just right, it's going to turn into a wall and so on. So that's part one on the hinge. Now the other thing that is really cool about hinges, and I will momentarily turn the motor off, it has these limits, okay? And what limits are is basically we're going to set up a lower and upper angle that determines how much the hinge can rotate. All right, so if this was set to 90, for example, you can see it's limiting this range here. And the moment I press play, you'll see that it is not moving all the way down. So if I move over here, it's just kind of sitting there. And that's because the hinge, imagine a line extending from here, and it hits this piece, this limit on this side. So this limit is a tricky one because it basically isn't allowing the hinge to rotate as it would. And let's change that. So instead of the lower angle, so we're going to set this to 90 and this to 0. Let's see what happens now with them flipped. Nothing. Okay, no change. All right. -90 and 0. Aha! All right, that works. So what's happening? The lower angle is the -90 off of here. You can see that changing. Right? So if I set it to, say, -30, that's the limit there. So that during playback, if I set this to -45, for example, it's going to limit it to only drop down by that much. Okay. Now what I'll do is I will also tell it to go ahead and use the motor. So the motor is trying to push it in this direction, push it up, but it's subject to this limit. So it can't cross this 0 boundary. So as I move out here, the motor is still acting strongly enough to not allow the player to push down on there. So let's decrease this force, and you'll see that it drops down. But now if the player moves, hopefully, let's see if I can't get the player out of the way here. All right, let's move this object out of the way. Cube, come on, cube, move there. And as long as that motor force is going to be enough, all right. Oh, well, last time I changed that lower again, so I'll do that. Motor force, we set that to 25. All right. So we'll drop down. And you'll see I'll go up here. And now the motor, well, it's not all that much force. Let's see. We need something a little bit stronger. So 30. Let's say 45. Even 50, I guess would be. 50 is pretty good to get it rotating. So let's set that to 50. We may have to see, this is where we have to this interaction between the player's mass and the motor and all this sort of thing. So now you can see the player adds enough mass to this to kind of open it up. But then once the player's not on it anymore, the hinge closes again. All right, so we'll go over here, let it pivot back up, and move the player across, and we'll see the player then can use that as sort of a trap door. So you can say, well, okay, now you could have a switch to enable and disable that hinge joint. Now, you might want to be careful to make sure that the hinge, that the position is locked in place, or you have some other sort of hinge or some other mechanism to make sure that gravity doesn't just, drop the. So really, probably what you want to do is manipulate. You can manipulate the limits. You can manipulate the speed. All that programmatically to decide, what is going on. So, for example, if you turn the motor on and off, subject to this switch over here, you could do something like that. So, let's see. Limits are set. The hinge is enabled. And what happens when I turn the motor on and off? Let's see. So, if the motor is just off, this just opens up, right? If the motor is on, it will move up like that. So let's go to our code. We have this little object down here, which has this trigger me. And last time around, it did this break function. So instead now, let's have it do something to that motor. So to find that motor, we're going to, we know it's on the bridge. So we'll be looking for the bridge's hinge motor. So let's see. Let's not try to disable that. Instead, we're going to say GameObject.find, and this is named bridge, right? Bridge dot get component, and we're looking for a hinge joint 2D, and we want to either turn the motor on or turn the motor off. Equals true. This will turn the motor on. Okay. Set the motor equals, what's motor dot motor speed, get type torque speed to string. If I could just turn it on, motor. Use motor. There we go. True. That's better. Use motor. So it's how to use the motor, set that to true. There. Save. And by default, we will come in here and we'll say, do not use the motor. And here's what should happen. All right, come here. Oh, well, we can't get to that. So let's try this a different way. We'd have to go up here, run over here, click that. Now the motor is activated and moved out of the way. So there's another puzzle. Now if I come over here, nothing happens again. Ooh, let's change that. Let's say this trigger over here, trigger me. We want to say we're going to make it a toggle. So we're going to say exclusive OR here, true, false. So it's going to flip it, right? That's the idea. So here we go. And we'll run up here, turn the motor on so we can get past. And if we needed to, we could go over here and say, turn the motor off, and it'll drop down again. Motor on. Whoops. Motor off. Nope, motor on, motor off. So you can see, I could even do something like if I made the bridge really, really heavy, so I couldn't sneak through here. There's going to be a problem here if I go like, air, dunk. Okay. Now, if I can't jump, I'm trapped in here. Okay. So if you need to rewind to see what's going on in the lesson here, but that's the basic idea. Is we're going to use this hinge joint and the motor on the hinge joint to kind of force it to go in certain directions to make its, to tailor its motion, its speed, and also the force that's on that hinge, right? So we set the angle limits so that it would not just completely rotate around and around and around with the motor, right? That's why we set the angular limits on it. And we set the speed. We could set it to be much faster. That would be, let's see what happens there. And that just means, let's see, if we come over here, it's going to come up pretty quickly. And again, now I'm trapped again. And the anchor points we kind of set graphically, move them around. We didn't have to do a lot of programming of the joint here. It really just came down to turning it on and off, enabling. Well, we didn't turn the joint on and off. We just turned the motor on and off here. So use motor, and we could also do things like just change use limits. Right? Any of these things we can change in our script. So if we wanted to have the motor move faster or have it react to forces differently, and so on and so on and so on, we certainly could do that. Right? So hopefully this inspires you to do some things with hinges. Hopefully it makes sense.